Welcome, my dear friends. Today, we delve into one of human history's most intriguing enigmas. We will explore a provocative question. What if the bloodline of Jesus Christ did not end, but secretly continued through the centuries? This is not merely a sensational conspiracy theory, but rather a whisper that penetrates the most hidden corners of consciousness, long after the day's noise has subsided. Imagine a thought settling like dust in an ancient chapel. What if Jesus of Nazareth, the man behind the myth, left behind not only teachings, but also children? This idea doesn't scream sacrilege. It hums with a quiet challenge, making us wonder how history is truly written. For as we know, history is always written by the victors. But what about those who chose to remain in the shadows? Many respected scholars and theologians will, of course, assert the absence of direct evidence. They will point to doctrines, dogmas, and the great church councils, such as Nicaea in 325 AD or Chalcedon in 451 AD, which meticulously defined which scrolls would become part of Holy Scripture, and which were destined to remain buried in the sands, like the Nag Hammadi manuscripts discovered in 1945, which unveiled early Christian Gnostic texts. Nevertheless, there are also fringe historians, those irreverent whispers in academic echo chambers, who have long traced a speculative yet remarkably persistent thread. What if Mary Magdalene was not merely a devoted disciple, but the mother of a secret lineage, a family tree that did not end at Golgotha, but quietly, strategically continued, carefully protected by the veil of time? Imagine the scene: a small, frail boat gently rocking off the rocky shores of ancient Gaul. Inside, Mary Magdalene, burdened by unbearable grief, perhaps already pregnant, seeks refuge from the chaos and persecution of Jerusalem. The air is thick with salt and the scent of wild Provençal herbs. Somewhere in the distance, in your imagination, you hear the chime of a church bell, though such bells shouldn't have existed then, only emphasizing the mysticism of the moment. It is here, in picturesque Provence, that the legends begin, where locals still whisper of a holy woman who came from the east, carrying a treasure far more precious than gold or worldly riches. Of course, traditional historians will merely roll their eyes skeptically. They will say it is nothing more than folklore, a quaint blend of medieval piety, local vanity, and a dash of romanticism stirred over centuries. Yet, even as they scoff, they are forced to admit that these legends have persisted for over 1,000 years. This is an astonishingly long time for a story to resist the ravages of time and oblivion. And so, we stand on the edge of a myth that refuses to die, despite all attempts to refute it. Now, my dear viewers, before we continue our fascinating journey through centuries and secrets, I would like to ask you to do one simple but incredibly important thing. If you enjoy this video and want more deep and intriguing stories like this to appear more often, please give this video a like. This will not only help our channel grow, but also show that you are interested in this topic. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new investigations. The link is always in the description. And of course, let us know in the comments where you are watching this video from. We are very interested to know the geography of our subscribers. Please watch this video to the end, because the most important conclusions and unexpected discoveries await you there. The Templars will appear later in our story. Mysterious chapels, strange frescoes depicting women embracing not infants, but great secrets, All this will also emerge in time. But today, it all begins with this question, with this faint breath. What if the bloodline survived? For the strongest secrets are those that do not need to shout. They live in subtle gestures, in half-finished symbols, in ancient stone patterns that reveal themselves only when the light falls at the right angle. Like the labyrinth tiles underfoot, those in the famous Chartres Cathedral, where the initiated are said to have once walked a silent path to enlightenment, seeking truth. But we will return to labyrinths later. For now, imagine a lineage passed down, not on banners of conquest, or with the thunder of trumpets, but in cradles, carefully hidden in monasteries, passed from generation to generation through merchant families, noble houses, and sometimes, when history became too loud and dangerous, even among the simplest peasants. It was not about power, at least not at first. It was about survival, because their very existence meant being persecuted. Popes don't appreciate rival claims to divine right, and kings don't tolerate unpredictable heirs capable of shaking their thrones. And yet, across oceans of time, this whisper continued, never silenced. Think of it as a relay race where, instead of the usual baton, a secret is passed, fragile, priceless, utterly silent, and somewhere in the heart of Europe, this secret is about to find its protectors. Those who wield swords, not just for Jerusalem, but for something far more ancient, far more quiet and intimate. But we will certainly return to the Templars very soon, when their time comes in this amazing story. The night air is full of questions, isn't it? It smells faintly of beeswax and ink, the same ink scribes used in scriptoria by candlelight, copying texts they perhaps shouldn't have read. You can almost hear the scratching of quills, the soft rustle of parchment as a monk pauses for a moment to glance over his shoulder, as if sensing an unseen presence. Remember that feeling, that slight chill down your spine. We will return to it when we enter the mysterious confines of Rennes-le-Château. For now, let's just drift further on the waves of this intrigue. Imagine that this bloodline was passed down not with trumpets and fanfare, but with lullabies, that it survives precisely because it never sought a throne. It hides in plain sight among stonemasons, apothecaries, and, when the time comes, in the ranks of monk warriors kneeling beneath red crosses. Some historians will still argue, what is the point of a bloodline if it never claimed power? But that is the whole irony, isn't it? Perhaps the true strength lay precisely in its unpretentiousness, in that quiet challenge that outlives empires and centuries. And now, as you close your eyes, the boat gently rocks again on that Provençal shore. The child is safe for now, but history, as we know, has a habit of waking dormant secrets. Now you sail further on this quiet but profound question that continues to stir minds. The waves have subsided, but the air still hums with salt and mystery, as if presaging new discoveries. Imagine Mary Magdalene once more. Her sandals touch the rocky Provençal shore, where the pungent scent of rosemary clings to the morning mist. She does not look like an idealized saint from a stained glass window. Her image is devoid of pathos. She looks tired, but resolute and, just possibly, pregnant, carrying within her not only personal grief, but also the seed of the future. Legend, that stubborn old mule that carries its burden through millennia, tells us that Mary Magdalene fled Jerusalem after the crucifixion, carrying with her not only the deepest sorrow, but also a secret that, if revealed, could overthrow empires and change the course of world history. You have probably heard the version where she lands in Sainte-Marie de la Mer, met not by triumphant trumpets, but by the quiet understanding of simple fishermen and salt-gatherers. Here, far from political intrigues and religious dogmas, she is no longer just a repentant sinner, as she was often portrayed. Here she becomes something else, much more. The mother of potential dynasties, the guardian of the greatest secret. Historians who adhere to conventional views, of course, present their extensive refutations. They tirelessly assert that there is no irrefutable evidence, calling it all medieval embroidery or fiction. However, as is known, evidence of truth does not always remain carved in stone. Sometimes it lives in unseen interstices, in traditions that older generations pass on to younger ones, when the Provençal wind howls behind tightly closed shutters. It is these quiet whispers that tell of a sacred womb. According to this theory, Mary Magdalene, perhaps carrying Jesus' child, was secretly taken from the troubled land on a humble boat, accompanied by a few devoted companions. Among them was Joseph of Arimathea, and likely, with them was not a chest full of gold, but precious scrolls containing records of a bloodline. This was a family tree whose roots would soon take hold in European soil. Imagine her image wrapped in indigo wool. She clutches both herself and her belly and this fragile future. The boat rocks steadily on the waves. The sea hisses softly at its sides. But her gaze remains fixed, for she knows that true survival does not depend on banners and armies. It lies in children, in intimate secrets, carefully guarded until the opportune moment. As this tradition spreads across the picturesque hills of Provence, it encounters something quite unusual, the phenomenon of the Black Madonna. In the sanctuaries of this region, statues of a dark-skinned virgin begin to appear, whose presence seems both mysterious and somewhat out of place. Some researchers suggest that these images symbolize Mary Magdalene, while others see them as an embodiment of a reborn Isis. The official church, as a rule, merely coughs delicately and tries to change the subject. However, these statues do not disappear from memory or from the landscape. They stand for centuries, silently confirming the existence of a bloodline, cleverly hidden in plain sight. Naturally, academic circles continue their fierce debates. Was the Black Madonna merely a cultural peculiarity, a temporary whim, or perhaps it was a medieval fascination with unusual pigments? Or, as proponents of alternative theories suggest, does it represent a veiled homage to a maternal line that official church doctrine dared not openly acknowledge? Imagine yourself walking through the winding streets of ancient stone villages, where time slows down, and ancient frescoes, despite their cracks, retain their deep meaning. In one such inconspicuous chapel, you might discover a fresco depicting a woman washing a man's feet. Notably, this act is presented not in a halo of sanctity, but with such intimate, everyday familiarity that it disconcerts many theologians. The question arises, could it be a wife? Or is it merely an artistic play, a master's jest? Esoteric historians, those distinguished explorers of unconventional paths, carefully collect such hints, as if searching for breadcrumbs leading to the truth. For them, Mary Magdalene is not merely a repentant follower. She appears as a sacred vessel, the living embodiment of the Grail, carrying within her a bloodline destined to intertwine with Europe's most ancient royal dynasties. It is at this point that the narrative becomes even more complex and intriguing. The Merovingians enter the historical stage, Frankish kings famous for their long, uncut hair, which served not merely as a hairstyle but as a symbol, as well as their serpentine emblems and a certain inconvenient peculiarity that set them apart from other monarchs. The church barely tolerated their presence and influence. However, alternative theories suggest that these rulers were not just ambitious warlords. They are believed to have been guardians of a sacred bloodline, protectors of Magdalene's descendants, ensuring that this line was never broken, neither by the sword's edge, nor by papal edicts, nor even by the passage of time. But we will return to the history of the Merovingians later. For now, one can imagine a silent conspiracy involving mothers and daughters, generations of women passing down not only traditional family recipes, but also the intimate secrets of a bloodline, sacred lullabies that carried the pulse of a long-forgotten dynasty. While kings waged bloody wars, these women carefully preserved the true heritage in candle-lit kitchens and sun-drenched vineyards. One can almost hear the creak of old wooden floors in an ancient Provençal farmhouse. The rich scent of lavender fills the air as an elderly matriarch turns to a child, saying, "You carry something ancient within you, my child, something they would silence if only they could. It is a bloodline that never sought thrones, but its very existence was threat enough." Discussions among historians on this matter will undoubtedly continue endlessly. Some stubbornly insist that it is merely a romantic fabrication, no more than a patchwork quilt of folk tales skillfully stitched together by conspiracy enthusiasts with an abundance of free time, but a severe lack of convincing evidence. However, curiously, these same scholars are still unable to fully explain the persistent and profound veneration of Mary Magdalene in this particular region, nor why her unseen presence seems to be woven into the very fabric of ancient stones. Symbols endure and continue to live, even where conventional facts crumble to dust. And today, as one traces her shadow through cobbled alleys, one seeks not merely a saint. One follows a woman who outlived empires, not through armies, but through quiet whispers and secrets passed down through generations. This bloodline, if it truly survived, did not announce itself with loud proclamations or ostentatious grandeur. It quietly sang its song, patiently waiting for those who would finally be ready to hear it. Now the listener can feel this subtle pull of an ancient line, permeating the fabric of time and drawing them into its profound mystery. From the sun-drenched Provençal shores, the narrative thread leads us to a dynasty whose history is shrouded in a thick veil of mystery and permeated with serpentine symbols, the Merovingians. Imagine them not as faceless rulers whose names merely flicker across the pages of dusty history textbooks, but as living, breathing enigmas whose presence is felt even across centuries. Envision a solemn coronation ceremony taking place in a magnificent candle-lit basilica, where kneeling Frankish nobles, their swords gleaming dully beneath tall vaulted arches, observe the proceedings. At the very center of this event stands a Merovingian king, his hair uncut, falling freely like a river of shadows over his shoulders. This hair, according to tradition, was not just a fashion statement. It served as a powerful symbol, a sacred covenant. It was believed that the longer the ruler's hair, the purer and more ancient his bloodline. Historians adhering to traditional views will always remind us that the Merovingians ruled the Franks for a significant period, from the 5th to the 8th century. Their legacy is presented as a complex intertwining of countless battles, treacherous betrayals, and constantly shifting borders. They will explain in detail how their power gradually waned, giving way to the more politically astute and influential Carolingians. However, there is something these scholars cannot explain, something that remains outside their traditional interpretations. The striking persistence of serpentine symbolism that enveloped this dynasty, like a coiled guardian. Proponents of fringe theories assert that these kings were not just skilled military commanders. They were, in their view, a kind of guardian and protector of a sacred bloodline. Their very rule, according to this perspective, served as a shield for something far more ancient than conventional monarchy, for something sacred and at the same time extremely inconvenient for the accepted understanding of history. The snake motif is traced on Merovingian artifacts, skillfully engraved on bronze buckles, intricately intertwined in stained glass, encircling royal seals. For some, this symbol represented an echo of ancient paganism, an embodiment of wisdom and knowledge. For others, it served as a hidden indication of a bloodline whose roots went back to the exiled line of Magdalene. Of course, academic circles scoff skeptically, for serpentine images were widespread in Gallo-Roman art. Scholars insist that it is too free an interpretation to associate them with sacred genealogical lines. However, perhaps their true concern is not the image of the snake itself, but rather the idea that beneath the visible surface of medieval Christianity, an ancient, unwavering thread of heritage continued to live, stubbornly refusing to be severed. Let us imagine the narrator and reader pausing in the courtyard of an ancient abbey. The characteristic crunch of gravel beneath someone's boots can be heard. A Merovingian queen glides past, her cloak of indigo and crimson velvet rustling with every movement, barely brushing the ancient stones. In her hands rests a bronze pendant in the shape of an 8-pointed star, a family treasure or perhaps a key to deeper mysteries. The church, ever vigilant, felt a growing unease about these long-haired kings. Their refusal to cut their hair was not mere vanity. It was an open defiance, a silent but persistent assertion of a heritage that no bishop could spiritually delegitimize. And when delicate admonitions proved futile, time itself prepared its ruthless shears. The Carolingian dynasty ascended to the throne, and the Merovingians officially exited the historical stage. However, history, as we know, has a habit of leaving unfinished business. There is a persistent theory that, although the Merovingian dynasty was politically annihilated, its bloodline simply went into hidden existence, intertwining with noble houses, spreading among merchant families, disguising itself with new heraldic symbols, but always remaining vigilant. And somewhere on this secret path, the Knights Templar, these mysterious warriors in white cloaks, took on the role of guardians and protectors. Now let the reader recall that image of the Black Madonna in the Provençal chapel. Similar images begin to appear more frequently in Poland, in Catalonia, even in remote Alpine churches. She is always dark-skinned, always maternal, often shrouded in mystery. Was she a symbol of all an encompassing faith, or a secret message for the initiated who knew where to look? Let the reader close their eyes and imagine a Templar chapel nestled in the hills. The air there is cold, thick with incense. Beneath a fresco of the Madonna, a knight kneels, tracing the serpent skillfully carved into the stone floor with his fingertips. His prayer is not for martial glory. He ensures that the name, that the bloodline, is not forgotten. Some scholars still categorically reject these assumptions. Coincidence, they whisper. Just folk tradition. But how many coincidences must overlap before an undeniable pattern emerges before one's eyes? Is the reader beginning to grasp this connection? The Merovingians were never just a dynasty. They represented a living, pulsating cipher. And though they were stripped of their crowns, their secret continued to exist in ancient manuscripts, in intricate carvings, in the hidden rituals of those who understood the true price. This bloodline was never loud, never sought publicity, but its presence is persistently felt, like the scent of wax and myrrh that lingers in old stone chapels long after the candles are extinguished. As evening deepens, and the symbolic serpentine images once again recede into the shadows, it becomes evident that the Merovingians did not vanish without a trace. They merely transformed their mode of existence, adapting to new realities. And beneath the Templar cross, their bloodline patiently awaited its next guardians. The torchlight flickers on ancient stone as the narrator and reader delve deeper and deeper into the enveloping silence, deeper into the intimate pulse beating beneath history's skin. The reader no longer stands in a magnificent cathedral. They find themselves beneath it, where the air feels colder and denser. The crypt of Rennes-le-Château waits patiently. Rennes-le-Château, a name that echoes with intrigue and mystery. For some, it is merely a small, picturesque village, nestled on a hill in southern France. For others, it is a vortex of unsolved mysteries, hidden parchments, and whispers of ancient bloodlines. But today, it is more a labyrinth woven from shadows, where secrets were once hidden in dusty ossuaries and beneath time-cracked altars. Officially, it's just an ordinary village church. Unofficially, it has been accused of concealing unimaginable secrets, from untold Templar treasures to even the remains of Christ himself. Scholars will shake their heads disapprovingly and sigh, saying, "Baseless theories, sensational nonsense." And yet these same scholars, nonetheless, continue to visit it in secret, discreetly, as if they too sense that the ancient stones of these walls hold far more memories than they are willing to openly display. The reader passes beneath a Romanesque arch, where a Latin inscription twists in faded, almost unreadable letters. This place inspires awe. Not in the sense of being ugly, but in its archaic meaning, terrible as in awe-inspiring, as sacred and simultaneously threatening. It is here that the narrative acquires a new, crucial guardian. Béranger Saunière, a 19th-century parish priest who, according to legend, discovered certain parchments during the church's restoration. Parchments that, it is claimed, hinted at a secret of such colossal scale that it could save monarchs or forever condemn them to oblivion. Some claim Saunière discovered ancient genealogical records, scrolls detailing bloodlines that traced not just noble families, but the most prominent family of all. Others suggest these were encrypted Templar documents. And of course, there are those who vehemently assert he found nothing at all, but was merely a priest with an entrepreneurial spirit and a passion for interior decorating. However, one only needs to look closely. Saunière's restorations were quite peculiar. The demonic Asmodeus supporting the holy water stoup, an altar guarded by statues of Mary Magdalene, frescoes depicting little-known biblical scenes in a strikingly provocative manner. It all looks almost as if the walls are winking, whispering, "Not everything holy is necessarily adorned with a halo." Father Saunière, lantern flickering in hand, slowly descended a narrow, winding staircase leading deep beneath the altar. Each step of his boots echoed hollowly off the damp stone walls until he discovered a small wooden casket. The chest was carefully sealed with a wax impression, clearly bearing an emblem, a serpent coiling around a star. Saunière was no ordinary treasure hunter. He was a guardian, a man keenly aware that truly priceless artifacts often needed to remain hidden from the world's gaze. It was rumored that he had found a document, irrefutably proving the existence and survival of a royal bloodline whose roots extended to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Others claimed it was an ancient map leading to Templar treasures, and some even whispered that the find was a mysterious book of names, the names of the guardians, protectors, and carriers of that very bloodline that had managed to survive harsh inquisitions and numerous church excommunications. However, it is here that a circumstance arises, causing many historians to shrug in bewilderment, and sometimes even flinch. Saunière unexpectedly and quite mysteriously acquired immense wealth. His fortune was not like a modest village lottery win. It was so vast that it allowed him to finance extensive and costly church renovations, as well as maintain extensive private libraries. Was this a mere coincidence? Or was it payment for silence, hush money for concealing a secret so explosive that its revelation could overturn the established world order? Imagine the screech of old iron hinges as massive stone slabs slowly slide apart, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside, amidst centuries of dust and old bones, rests something unusual. At the very center of this niche, carefully wrapped in oiled cloth, lies a scroll, not a familiar gospel, but an ancient genealogical table. On it, names, like grapevines, intertwine and branch through centuries, forming a family tree that, by all canons, simply should not have existed. Of course, many skeptics vehemently reject such claims. They insist that Saunière's immense fortune was accumulated through the questionable practice of selling masses en masse, and any mention of treasure is considered mere myth, cleverly concocted by greedy opportunists. However, if everything were so simple and prosaic, then why these enigmatic inscriptions woven into the church's architecture? What was the purpose of these skillfully hidden chambers and secret niches? And why was such a masterful reinterpretation of sacred icons necessary, transforming them into complex patterns that, to a discerning and trained eye, tell of events and ideas far exceeding accepted dogma? It seems as if the entire village of Rennes-le-Château is a palimpsest, an ancient parchment whose text has been repeatedly rewritten, but never completely erased, retaining its original, intimate meanings beneath the upper layer. Leaving the crypt, one feels the night air around them change. It seems lighter, yet electrified, filled with an unseen energy. One's gaze involuntarily turns to the chapel's facade, where two majestic columns, known as Jachin and Boaz, stand tall. They are like silent guardians, their presence perceived as something more than mere architectural elements. Perhaps they are Masonic symbols, or perhaps even older, deeper references to the ancient guardianship of certain secrets. This is a place where symbols speak louder than any sermons, where images of serpents and stars whisper with greater force than the ringing of bells. Here, the bloodline is not merely an ancient relic. it is alive. It breathes through every stone, through the mortar, through the sacred geometry that Saunière so skillfully carved into his church, disguising it as ordinary decoration. And regardless of whether one believes in these ancient parchments or not, the very spirit of Rennes-le-Château inexorably pushes one to ask further questions. What secret was so dangerous, so powerful, that it had to be meticulously hidden beneath layers of myth, masonry, and deliberate disinformation? As the moonlight gently spills over the village streets, one can almost physically feel that pulse, the pulse of a bloodline that seems never to have truly slept. Standing beneath the overhanging, mighty arches of an ancient Templar commandery, one feels the air, though still, as if electrified, as if the very stones around are listening intently to unseen voices. Within these walls, ordinary whispers transformed into sacred vows. It was here that legends were forged, not in opulent royal halls, but in cold, vaulted chambers where unbreakable secrecy was the first and last rule. The Knights Templar. For most common folk, they appear as valiant crusaders, monk warriors equally adept with the sword and holy scripture. However, beneath this carefully polished and accepted narrative lies another, far deeper layer of history, stubbornly refusing to be erased by time. What if their famous crusades were more than just military campaigns to Jerusalem? What if their true and intimate mission was not so much to preserve sacred relics as to guard a certain bloodline? A bloodline that, if fully revealed, could irrevocably shatter the very hierarchy of the Christian world. The Church branded them heretics, and the Crown saw them as a serious threat, but those who operated in the shadows knew the true context of events. The Templars were guardians of a secret far older than any papal decree, and incomparably more dangerous. Imagine a secret council gathered deep within one of the Templar preceptories. The chamber where they convene is perfectly circular. At its center, on a table, an intricately carved 8-pointed star is engraved, the very symbol previously seen in chapel labyrinths, on hidden vault doors, and on ancient bronze pendants, carefully passed down through generations. In the flickering torchlight, the faces of the knights are clearly visible, their eyes filled with solemn seriousness as they exchange vows spoken in barely audible whispers. At the very center of the table lies a single scroll, sealed with a crimson wax serpent. This was not a battle plan or a military strategy. It was an ancient genealogical table, a complex map of bloodlines rooted in a highly controversial and fundamental point of origin. At this stage, mainstream historical science will undoubtedly intervene. They will vehemently state that the Templars were primarily bankers, soldiers, and skilled builders, but by no means guardians of mysterious bloodlines. However, it is here that the accepted narrative begins to diverge from alternative perspectives. How did a military order manage to accumulate such sudden and truly colossal wealth? How did they gain access to the most restricted archives of the Vatican, achieve privileges that no other order dared even dream of, and erect numerous fortified structures containing enigmatic architectural codes? Fringe theorists, however, propose that beneath their impressive militaristic facade, the Templars effectively functioned as an extensive mobile network for storing particularly valuable information. The treasures they were accused of possessing were not golden chalices or jewel-encrusted relics. They were priceless documents, detailed genealogies, keys to a bloodline that, if confirmed, could destabilize not only royal thrones, but also the very foundations of church altars. In historical traditions, stories invariably surface about mysterious Templar ships whose holds were filled not with customary military trophies, but rather with crates concealing sealed scrolls and meticulously carved stone tablets. These vessels were not bound for bustling trade ports, but for secluded, secure harbors where an ancient bloodline could find refuge and discreetly, yet steadily, continue its existence. Imagine this scene, deep at night under the cover of darkness. A Templar ship silently glides over the waves, carrying the weight of a sacred mission, escaping the persecution of inquisitors to remote abbeys, where the resident monks, it is presumed, fully understood the true stakes. Undoubtedly, academic circles will hasten to warn against hasty conclusions, reminding that simple correlation does not always imply causation. And perhaps the Templars' actions were dictated solely by pragmatic considerations. However, when one carefully examines the location of Templar commanderies, strategically placed along ancient pilgrimage routes that surprisingly coincide with the presumed migrations of certain bloodlines, this complex, interconnected network becomes virtually impossible to ignore. Within the walls of these very commanderies, it is claimed, rites were performed that were not mentioned in any official document or chronicle. The initiation of the guardians of the mysterious bloodline took place not through lavish and public ceremonies, but through the utterance of barely audible whispered vows in semi-darkness, beneath vaulted arches illuminated only by the flickering flame of candles. It was symbols, images of serpents, celestial stars, intricate labyrinths, that became the true language of communication at these intimate gatherings. This language remained absolutely invisible to those whose search was concerned only with material values, the clang of swords and the gleam of coins. There is an ancient Templar saying, rarely quoted, "Not all treasure is silver." In the context of these secret knowledges and hidden missions, it acquires a completely different, much deeper meaning, surpassing in importance any material wealth stored in the most secure treasuries. Let us mentally transport ourselves to that very council chamber where destinies were decided. Here the Grand Master, clad in humble garments but with a discerning, sharp gaze, unhurriedly unseals an ancient scroll, using a blade skillfully forged in the shape of a serpent's fang. He begins to read aloud, and it becomes clear. This is not another order or edict, but merely a name. The name of a child, whose birth occurred in deep secrecy, and who is the bearer of that very bloodline whose existence the vast majority of people stubbornly deny. This name, once spoken in the sacred twilight, immediately transforms into an unbreakable oath of protection, forever woven into the solemn vows of every knight present in this intimate assembly. Thus, the hostile attitude of the Catholic Church towards the Templar order in those times represented something more than just fear of a potential rival for power. It was, in essence, a preemptive strike aimed at those who were the custodians and bearers of a narrative capable of radically rewriting the very theological foundations of the Christian world. A narrative that was embodied not in dry doctrines or ecclesiastical dogmas, but in living flesh and blood. When King Philip IV of France initiated mass arrests of Templars in 1307, the official charges sounded like heresy, idolatry, and blasphemy, convenient but general formulations designed to justify the repression. However, behind these public accusations lay the true crime: possession. Possession of such truths that could not be silenced or suppressed by any papal bulls or decrees. Some historians tend to argue that the liquidation of the Templar order was driven solely by economic and political motives. Their immense wealth seemed too tempting, and their influence too extensive to remain unchecked. However, such an explanation appears to be incomplete and superficial. If the sole purpose of the persecution was to seize material assets, then why was there such a fanatical obsession with eradicating all traces of their rituals, symbols, and most importantly, scrolls? The fact is, monarchs can usually forgive the greed of their subjects and are even willing to tolerate a certain degree of their power. But the existence of a secret that questions the very legitimacy of their divine right to the throne cannot be allowed under any circumstances. Thus, the greatest treasure of the Templars was not a gilded chalice hidden in some secret compartment. It was a genealogical table, at first glance inconspicuous and fragile, but powerful enough to shatter centuries-old dogmas. A document that unequivocally declared, "The bloodline continues quietly, inexorably." As the last torch illuminating this stark stone chamber finally extinguishes, plunging it into darkness, and the nights silently disperse, it becomes clear that what transpired was far more than an ordinary meeting. It was a solemn affirmation, a renewed covenant, sealed by invisible bonds. And somewhere, carefully hidden beneath layers of architectural forms and deep strata of history, this sacred bloodline continues its existence, guarded by the unseen echo of those very whispered vows once spoken. Under the silvery moonlit sky, breathing in the salty air, the sea steadily breathes as a lone ship confidently cuts through the dark, deep waves. Imagine yourself on its deck. The wind plays freely with your cloak, and the taste of salt is on your lips. This is, undoubtedly, no ordinary sea voyage. This vessel does not seek martial glory or territorial conquests. Its true purpose is to find saving silence and oblivion. It was on a night like this that an entire Templar fleet once disappeared. A fleet whispered about only in shadowy taverns and whose existence was stubbornly denied by royal scribes. Official chronicles describe in detail mass arrests, forced confessions, confiscation of assets, and harsh punishments for those declared heretics. However, a legitimate question arises. What happened to those ships that managed to escape the port of La Rochelle before the king's men could finally tighten their deadly net? It is in this context that so-called fringe historians put forward a very intriguing concept. According to their assumptions, the Templars did not simply flee with accumulated gold or material possessions. They are believed to have rescued crucial documents, priceless relics, and something immeasurably more precious, a living bloodline. One can almost feel its invisible weight, represented now. In the ship's hold, beneath a thick canvas tarp, a small wooden chest is securely tied, sealed with a wax emblem depicting a serpent. It is not imposing in size, nor is it adorned with luxurious carvings or inlay. However, its humble-looking contents would possess power enough to completely destroy entire dynasties and alter the course of history. In opposition to these theories, representatives of official, mainstream historiography will invariably state that all of this is nothing more than convenient myth-making. There is no documentary evidence of a lost Templar fleet, they insist, running their fingers over the impeccably clean lines on maps that stubbornly refuse to acknowledge the existence of shadows and unclear areas. And yet, If one carefully examines the port logs of La Rochelle, quite suspicious gaps are found. Entire days remain unrecorded, and the fate of many ships is unaccounted for. What if this mysterious voyage was the true exodus? An exodus not of an entire people, but of a deeply intimate secret capable of changing the world. Glancing across the deck, one can see hooded figures frozen at their posts. Their hands rest not on the hilts of swords, ready for battle, but on ancient scrolls and carefully sealed chests. These people are true guardians, silent couriers of that very bloodline that has no place in royal courts or consecrated churches. Every gust of wind sweeping over the ship seems to herald a kind of countdown, and every creak of the wooden hull reminds them of the heavy burden of forbidden blood they carry. Below deck, in concealment, a veiled woman gently embraces a small child. Her fingers softly touch a bronze pendant hanging from the infant's neck, an 8-pointed star entwined with a serpent, not merely an ornament, but a powerful symbol of heritage and immense responsibility. This child is not destined for a throne or public glory. Their future is seen as quieter, but also far more dangerous. They are the next, vital link in the unbroken chain of this sacred bloodline. Quietly. This is where the chronicle of church events becomes especially delicate. Why was the persecution of the Templar order so swift, so comprehensive? From where such urgency, if not from the fear that something irreversible was about to vanish into the abyss? Independent researchers point to the sudden calm around La Rochelle after October 1307. Witnesses suddenly became forgetful. Reports grew vague, as if an invisible hand had reached into historical annals and blurred the ink of the past. The ship rocks steadily on the waves, and one's gaze involuntarily catches sight of a small island on the horizon. A place with no name on royal maps, perhaps a lost monastery, perhaps just an intermediate stop. The point is that it is a remote, secluded area, a perfect hiding place for secrets that should never be officially acknowledged. The Templars did not need massive fortresses. They needed such corners where truth could hide in plain sight. A stone chapel, a walled garden, a labyrinth carved into the rock. These places became their repositories, and the bloodline continued, not in opulent palaces, but in silent monasteries, guarded by those who deeply understood the gravity of their mission. As the traveler descends into the hold, the air here becomes thick with the scent of wax and parchment. Scrolls, carefully wrapped in oiled leather, are stacked like fragile logs. But it is the genealogical table that draws the eye. Unfurled on a makeshift altar, it stretches through centuries. Its ink has faded, but stubbornly retains its outlines. Names not found in publicly available scriptures. Names that, if spoken aloud in certain courts, would inevitably summon the Inquisition. The Templars did not flee from punishment. They escaped complete annihilation, above the night whispers of pursuit. Perhaps it is no more than the uneasy breath of the sea. Or perhaps it is the echo of royal ships, following in the dark, guided by orders to retrieve not gold, but something far more dangerous to the established order. A living truth. Of course, skeptics will merely raise their eyebrows. They will point to the lack of concrete evidence, to the suspicious allure of conspiracy theories. But in every rejected legend, a seed remains, resisting the erosion of time. A fragment that will not disappear, no matter how diligently the ink is erased. Now, it is felt in the air. A tension. the weight of centuries pressing down on the fragile wooden hull. The ship is not just transporting people or artifacts, it carries a contradiction, a living paradox that challenges the orderliness of official history. As the island approaches, the torchlight flickers along its rocky shore. Hooded figures await, their hands empty but heavy with anticipation. Tonight, the bloodline will quietly pass from one guardian to another. No fanfare, no recorded ceremonies, only the silent transmission of a secret too dangerous for scrolls alone. The ship glides into a hidden cove, the sound of the surf muffled by sharp rocks. Ropes are thrown, chests are lifted, scrolls are carefully packed. The child is the last to come ashore, carried beneath the folds of a simple wool cloak. No banners, no trumpets, and yet history subtly changes. As the ship disappears back into the mist, understanding dawns. This was not an escape. This was a migration of truth, the movement of something that refuses to be silenced. Even when it is buried beneath oceans of time, the traveler stands beneath the cold vault of a mountain abbey, where every breath feels like an intrusion. The air here is sharp, with a hint of candle wax and something older. Raw stone, perhaps, or the faint trace of incense that hasn't burned for centuries. Secrets slumber here, or rather skillfully pretend to. The abbey itself is barely marked on royal maps. Built into a granite ridge, it is a fortress cleverly disguised as a place of prayer. But the monks here are no ordinary brothers. Their vows extend beyond silence and poverty. They are guardians of a heritage that does not fit into conventional psalms. Mainstream historians often dismiss such places as monastic eccentricities, relics of feudal patronage. But if one carefully examines the patterns, one can see that these remote monasteries are suspiciously clustered along forgotten pilgrimage routes. Routes that, alternative theorists claim, were the arteries of the bloodline, traversing Europe in a hidden network of sanctuaries and refugees. The traveler moves along a narrow corridor, fingers brushing against walls that seem to breathe stories. At the end is a cell, humble, unfurnished, save for a single stone pedestal on which rests a bronze reliquary. The motif of the serpent and star gleams faintly in the dim light, a quiet defiance to centuries that tried to bury it. Some scholars claim that it is here that myths go too far. There is no credible evidence linking these rural abbeys to a Templar exodus, they insist, clinging to their citations. But what if evidence is not always ink and parchment? What if it is the architecture itself, the deliberate displacements, the enigmatic engravings of labyrinths on floor tiles, the apses of chapels that are aligned not with Jerusalem, but with little-known constellations? A monk appears, hood drawn low, his steps silent. He carries a scroll tube of old oak bound with crimson silk. It is presented not with ceremony, but with a quiet, almost weary reverence, as if this transmission has been repeated from generation to generation, always with the same solemnity. One notices that his fingers linger slightly on the silk knot. Not reluctance, but a deep understanding. Once this scroll leaves the abbey, another link in the chain of silence will be released into the world beyond its walls, vulnerable yet unconquerable. The scroll itself, hardly a grand tome, is striking in its brevity, yet within its faded ink lies centuries of defiance, an echo of ancient times. Names, meticulously inscribed on parchment, are listed without the pomp of titles, merely for identification. The bloodlines are presented not as a source of pride, but as an unbroken thread of continuity, linking generations. There comes a moment when, holding this scroll, one feels its weight, which seems utterly disproportionate to its humble size. This feeling is akin to what a scribe in ancient Alexandria might have experienced, watching merciless flames devour a magnificent library. It was not merely the loss of paper, but the loss of breath, of unspoken stories, of entire worlds dissolving in fire. Outside, beyond the ancient walls, the wind sings its humming song through the abbey arches, and this sound is perceived as a warning, presaging something sacred. Fringe theorists, whose views often remain outside accepted history, suggest that the survival of this bloodline was the result not of grand conspiracies or large-scale secret operations, but of countless, barely noticeable, yet deliberate acts of preservation. It was a mother discreetly passing her pendant to a child, a monk hiding a valuable scroll beneath an old floorboard, a knight choosing voluntary exile rather than renouncing his beliefs. Within this abbey, in its stone walls, these ancient, courageous choices continue to echo, filling the air with unseen significance. One such theory posits that certain monastic orders were never fully integrated into the rigid hierarchy of the official church. They deliberately remained on the periphery, operating in the margins of history, carefully preserving oral traditions, symbols, and rituals deemed too dangerous for public or even written exposition. The monks residing here may utter Latin prayers, but their true liturgy remains unrecorded, passed down by word of mouth, hidden behind ritualistic gestures and coded hymns. Of course, many academics would greet these assumptions with derision, dismissively waving them away as romantic nonsense. They would declare, pointing to the complete absence of any written doctrine, but perhaps that is the very essence of it. Some truths, by their nature, are simply not meant for ink. The traveler finds themselves in a small apothecary chamber, its shelves tightly packed with glass vials and bundles of dried herbs. At first glance, this room seems completely irrelevant, its purpose purely utilitarian. But then the gaze falls upon the central beam of the apothecary, where the faint outline of a serpent, almost erased by relentless time, is nevertheless unmistakably discernible. It becomes clear that this room serves not only to heal the body. The monk silently points to a map made of goatskin, spread out on a simple wooden table. It has no familiar borders or kingdom designations, only a mysterious grid of symbols, 8-pointed stars, coiled serpents, chalices, intricate labyrinths. This is not a geographical map indicating a path across the landscape. It is a map of memory, where each symbol marks a place where the bloodline was preserved. Some of these are abbeys, others hidden caves, ancient wells, and even, at first glance, the most mundane crossroads. A finger involuntarily slides over these symbols, and one feels an invisible web stretching across Europe, permeating mountain passes and running beneath city stones, connecting something more than just points on a map. It's not about some final destination, but about a deep, unbreakable connection. The monk remains silent, but his unspoken question hangs in the air. Will the traveler remember what the ink dare not say? The abbey bells begin to chime, their melodious sound muffled by distance, but their rhythm resonates deeply in the chest. This is not a place of loud statements or declarations. It is a sanctuary of quiet but unwavering persistence. And now the traveler begins to understand that the bloodline's resilience has little to do with royal alliances or lavish nocturnal vows. It survives thanks to these forgotten sanctuaries, where history is preserved not in bank vaults, but in breath, in memory, in absolute silence. As the traveler returns to the corridor, the reliquary still rests on its pedestal, unguarded, yet utterly untouched, as if protected by an invisible force. Its presence here is, in itself, a quiet rebellion, a silent reminder that not all true treasures wear crowns or reside beneath the magnificent domes of cathedrals. The bloodline is not hiding. It waits, patiently awaiting its hour. The traveler follows the monk into a narrow passage where the walls seem to constrict, and stone breathes into stone, creating a sense of an ancient, living space. Each step here echoes with exaggerated importance, emphasizing the significance of this path. The air becomes noticeably colder, damper, with a faint, almost imperceptible metallic tang. The descent underground begins again, and by this point, the traveler knows with certainty that it is there, in the depths, that true stories love to hide, guarded from prying eyes. Beneath the abbey, there is indeed a vault, but it is not the grand, echoing treasury one might expect. It is modest, with a low ceiling, and its walls are lined not with gold, but with niches. In each niche rests a small, utterly unassuming chest, made of wood and bound with iron straps, some barely larger than a loaf of bread. There are no richly decorated carvings, no precious stone inlays, only simple vessels of forgotten legacies. Fringe historians call them bone libraries, not because they contain bones, though who knows, but because they hold the very essence of stories, the genetic code of dynasties. These chests do not contain treasures in the traditional royal sense. They carry bloodline markers, serpent rings, inscribed chalices, fragments of parchment inscribed with ancient family crests. Mainstream historians, however, have a far less poetic name for them. Monastic relic archives. It sounds dry, sterile, academic. They meticulously catalog the contents, annotate their inventories with numerous footnotes, and completely miss the point, because these are not mere museum exhibits meant for static contemplation. They are rather breadcrumbs pointing the way. The traveler stops before a niche where a chest is slightly ajar, as if inviting a look inside. The monk notices their gaze and silently, with almost reverent caution, lifts the lid. Inside, on a folded piece of goatskin, lies a small bronze pendant. Engraved on the pendant is an 8-pointed star, intertwined with a coiled serpent, an emblem that for centuries appeared in the margins of little-known manuscripts, discreetly carved into the lintels of ancient chapels, and secretly worn by members of certain noble bloodlines. But it is here that heated disputes arise among scholars. The star serpent is a Templar variant of the Eastern Ouroboros symbol, some argue, citing ancient trade routes and cultural diffusion. Others insist it is a Merovingian artifact, a symbol of sovereign blood, appropriated and carefully hidden by the Templars after the fall of Jerusalem. These disputes are almost as old as the chest itself. The traveler takes the goatskin scroll. It crackles softly in their hands, its texture dry and fibrous, like the skin of some ancient creature. The ink has faded with time, but is still legible, and the script itself, neither Latin nor Greek. It is a cipher, a language of glyphs, intended not to be read by many, but to be memorized by a select few. The monk, lost in thought, lights a tiny oil lamp resting on a rough stone shelf. Its soft glow slowly spreads through the space, picking out pale, almost erased engravings on the wall hidden behind the massive chest. This map does not indicate geographical coordinates. It is a complex diagram of a bloodline, where intersecting spirals and nodes are marked not by names, but by enigmatic symbols. Perhaps it is a stylized tree of life, or an intricate labyrinth, but in any case it pulsates with living, unbreakable connections. Soon the room fills with an unusual warmth, as if the ancient walls themselves respond to the lamp's light, exhaling secrets they have kept for so long in their cold silence. The monk's attention is drawn to one of the nodes, marked with the image of the star serpent. It is located neither at the origins or roots of this complex labyrinth, nor at its final path. Rather, it hovers somewhere in the middle, a crossroads where multiple paths converge. Some unorthodox researchers hypothesize that this symbol serves as proof of a parallel structure within the Templar order, a secret brotherhood dedicated to preserving the bloodline. This society, they believe, operated covertly under the guise of the official hierarchy of knights, commanders, and grand masters. In essence, it was a network of guardians whose vows were sworn not to the Holy See in Rome, but directly to the bloodline itself. In other words, it was a secret hidden within an even deeper secret. One can almost physically sense the unseen presence of modern historian skepticism, the echoes of their voices sounding deep within. It's just an allegory, they would undoubtedly declare, a medieval reflection on spiritual rebirth. However, a pertinent question arises. Why then hide this knowledge in a carefully concealed vault beneath an abbey, encoding it, sealing it, and passing it down through generations only in whispers, as if it were the greatest secret? The monk closes the chest with particular care. He does not lock it, for there is no need. The weight of traditional inertia, its unbreakable force, proves far more potent than any iron bolt. Deep down, an involuntary premonition arises that if someone was truly meant to open these ancient chests, they would surely know how. If not, the chest itself would simply refuse to reveal its age-old stories. As the path leads back to the main cloister, the striking contrast between worlds is apparent. Sunlight generously floods the ancient flagstones, and the distant chime of bells softly reminds one of the world above, a world of markets, political intrigues, sermons, and pervasive skepticism. Yet beneath one's feet, in the deep silence, a defiant and resilient bloodline continues its silent, eternal pilgrimage. In certain very closed circles, whispers circulate about a theory that not all bloodlines are recorded in official royal registers. Some are preserved not by right of the crown, but by conscious choice. These are families who, for generations, deliberately renounced titles, vast estates, and worldly fame, skillfully weaving themselves into the dense fabric of village communities, abbeys, and merchant guilds. The star serpent pendants in their case are not merely hereditary relics of pride or status. They serve as a kind of compass, quiet but powerful reminders of a great responsibility that can outlive any glory and vanity. Before the journey continues, the monk gently places a hand on one's shoulder. He says nothing. There is no need. This touch itself is an acknowledgement, a shared understanding that history is not a straight and predictable line. It twists, hides in shadows, and then resurfaces unexpectedly. Stepping out into the bright sunlight, one inadvertently realizes that they begin to look at the surrounding landscape in a completely different way. Every stone chapel, every bustling marketplace, even the time-worn carvings at the edge of an old well, all are no longer just background scenery. They are silent witnesses, The true meaning of the bloodline was never about dominion or conquest. It was always about endurance, about resilience. It is a heritage that survives not through force, but flows quietly beneath the surface, like an underground stream that imperceptibly but steadily changes the bedrock, whisper by whisper. And now, a part of this unseen current is carried within. The path leads higher into the winding folds of the Languedoc Hills, where the wind is not merely a natural phenomenon, but an accomplice, carrying ancient whispers through majestic cypress groves. Soon, ruins appear, a chapel whose roof long ago succumbed to the destructive action of time, but whose stone bones stand stubbornly, like ribs arched towards the sky. This is not a place where crowds of tourists flock. There are no information boards, no organized tours, only the slow, majestic decay of history, left to the mercy of the elements. Yet beneath this apparent desolation, something pulsating, unseen, is felt. One enters. The air here is colder, denser, as if saturated with centuries of mystery. Light softens, penetrating through broken arches and painting the floor with fragmented mosaics of golden and gray hues. Immediately, an indescribable sensation arises, as if one is being watched, although no one is there, at least visibly. The nave of the chapel stretches forward, the floor paved with ancient flagstones, worn smooth by countless centuries of footsteps. But the guide, the silent brother who followed from the abbey, points not forward, but down. His finger indicates a slab near the altar, its edges marked with mysterious symbols. A cross, undoubtedly, but intertwined with a serpent, and an 8-pointed star nestled in its curves. Fringe historians interpret this symbol as a sign of guardianship. Mainstream academia, in contrast, dismisses it as merely a decorative element, a whim of a local artisan. But gradually, one begins to understand that it is precisely in such deviations that truth loves to hide. With some effort, the slab slides aside, revealing a narrow descent into a chamber that resembles a wound in the earth rather than a full room. One descends, and the air grows colder until the walls begin to gleam with moisture. Then it appears, a stone pulpit on which rests a chalice. No gold, no jewels, only stone, gray, with streaks of faint crimson lines, as if the material itself retained the memory of blood. The chalice is unremarkable, yet its unseen presence dominates the space. This is not merely a display, it is an assertion. Some scholars claim that these stone chalices are nothing more than medieval communion vessels, made for purely practical reasons. Others whisper that they are sacred vessels of the bloodline, meant to hold not wine, but the heritage itself. Blood in its most literal and sacred sense. One approaches closer. Around the pulpit, intricately carved into the floor, a labyrinth spirals outwards, its lines so fine they are almost erased by time. This labyrinth is not designed to confuse, but to trace. It is a map of a bloodline, echoing the star serpent glyphs seen in the monastic vault. On this matter, researchers' opinions diverge fundamentally. One school of thought hypothesizes that the labyrinth marks the refugees of the mysterious Templar bloodline, representing a hidden pilgrimage route that stretches from the Pyrenees to the misty highlands of Scotland. Another concept, far more figurative and sublime, suggests that the labyrinth symbolizes the inner journey of an elect genealogical line, a path of spiritual awakening masterfully encoded in the stone patterns. The observer kneels beside the ancient labyrinth, tracing its winding lines with a fingertip. The stone surface feels surprisingly warm, as if some inner energy glowed within it, which seemed entirely unnatural for such ancient material. In their mind, images arise of the scribe in the monastic library, the enigmatic serpent symbols they had seen before, and the pendant that once rested in their hand. These objects, they realized, were not merely artifacts of the past, not ancient relics, but rather guideposts, a kind of breadcrumbs left for those capable of deciphering them. Above the observer, through the exposed rafters of the roof frame, the sky transforms. The clouds part, and a single ray of sunlight, like an arrow, pierces the ancient ruins, descending directly onto the ancient chalice. Its crimson veins begin to shimmer dully, emitting a soft glow, like smoldering embers freshly stirred. One could attribute this to a chance occurrence, but such an interpretation would be too superficial and frivolous. The place itself seemed specially designed for such insights and omens. As the traveler rises, the guide, for the first time in hours, breaks the silence. "It is not hidden at all," he says, his voice low but surprisingly firm. "It is merely awaiting its hour." This phrase deeply settles in their mind as they return to the sunlight. Historians often portray the Templars as shrewd financiers, valiant warriors, or mere political pawns. However, the idea that they saw themselves as guardians, custodians of something that significantly surpassed gold and earthly power, is not as romantic as it might seem at first glance. It is rather inconvenient. This thought shatters familiar, neat historical narratives and established concepts. For if one considers, ultimately, that the chalice discovered beneath these ruins is not the legendary Holy Grail in its traditional Arthurian sense, but rather an anchor for a specific bloodline, a vessel that symbolizes continuity and succession, a materialized marker of a genealogical line that deliberately chose patient waiting over immediate power. Thus, in light of these considerations, the Templars were not merely guardians of some ancient relic. They were, in essence, guardians of a particular choice made by their ancestors. The traveler leaves the chapel, yet its unseen weight inexorably follows them. Each step down the mountainside feels unusually heavy, as if gravity asserts itself with greater force than usual. Now it becomes clear why the Knights Templar preferred to hide their treasures in plain sight, not in impregnable vaults, but in rituals, in songs passed down by word of mouth, and in humble rings worn by simple farmers and stonemasons. And one involuntarily wonders how many people daily pass by these symbols, their eyes clouded by centuries of enforced oblivion, while the true guardians of secrets quietly smile, aware of the full depth and weight of what they carry. The valley, stretching below, seems boundless, like a blanket of green and gold, woven in the same patterns seen on the ancient map. History has not ended. It has merely changed its language. The traveler stands on the edge of a windswept cliff. The Pyrenees stretch below, like a grandiose tapestry carved from stone by nature itself. The air is filled with the scent of sea salt and pungent mountain sage. Somewhere far below, ancient paths wind through deep gorges, where for centuries the whispers of forgotten stories have gathered, lurking in the moss. Today, the gaze is not directed downwards. It is turned upwards to the high vaults of history, where a once secret dynasty, like a ghost, soared in the shadow of papal thrones and royal crowns. One can imagine a coronation in Avignon, but not one characterized by the pomp of golden scepters and public splendor. This refers to an intimate ceremony held within ancient stone walls, known only to a select circle of initiates. A bloodline traced not through dusty scrolls and genealogical trees, but through the carefully preserved breath of people sworn to silence. This is the Templar bloodline, which, like an unseen current, flowed in the veins of kings, but was officially declared non-existent by decree of Rome, remaining hidden from prying eyes. Some historians will certainly declare this to be pure legend, asserting that dynasties are built through powerful armies and political treaties, not through hidden parchments and secret rites. However, if one listens to the archivists of Rennes-le-Château, they will point to the Shepherd's Testament, a document made of goatskin, sealed with mysterious 8-pointed stars. In it, bloodlines snake from Jerusalem, passing through Merovingian vaults, and ultimately reaching the hands of a Templar named Bertrand. This man was not a nobleman. He was a simple stonemason, a kind of living cipher, a guardian of intimate knowledge. One can imagine Bertrand with a lantern in hand, confidently pacing an underground chamber located beneath a long-forgotten Languedoc monastery. The walls of this dungeon are rough and unpolished by wealth, but his steps are firm and measured. He knows exactly where the secret vault is. It contains not gold, but an intricately carved reliquary bearing a symbol that the official church brands as heresy. It is a chalice, entwined with grapevines, guarded by a serpent. The tension between what is depicted on the relic and what is preached from church pulpits is palpable, isn't it? Here in the cool breath of the stone, Templar artisans expressed their silent protest not with swords, but with chisel blows that they knew would outlive any papal decrees. Bertrand's hands, calloused from building dust, were the hands of a king, a quiet but resolute rebel. And yet, while scholars dispute the very existence of such reliquaries, the ruined vault of the abbey reveals frescoes that clearly do not fit the official narrative. Serpents entwining stars, crosses wreathed in vines. To the ordinary person, this is just a decaying medieval fresco. But to the guardian of the bloodline, it is, without a doubt, a map. The Church prefers to classify such symbols as folk heresies, as if faith itself can be packaged and neatly shelved. However, faith is a slippery and elusive substance. It hides in stone crevices and ancient chants. It patiently waits for those with the right vision to see it. Bertrand's reliquary would disappear from official records. Nevertheless, centuries later, it would resurface in whispers of a serpent chalice, passed hand to hand among French resistance priests, hidden beneath chalice coverings during secret masses. Irony weaves its way into these legends like a golden thread. The very relic condemned by Rome was consecrated by those who risked their lives to preserve it. The air grew relentlessly colder, and it seemed one could feel the penetrating frost seeping through the thick fabric of Bertrand's garment as he decisively pressed the deep crimson wax seal against the monolithic stone slab for the last time, completing the act of preserving the vault. The wax itself was quite ordinary, but the gesture itself was far from mundane. It was a farewell to an entire genealogical line, destined to exist in deep shadow. Above him, the unsettling chime of monastic bells steadily drifted, yet they were not merely marking the passage of hours. They were heralding an impending threat. The Inquisition had its eyes and ears everywhere. Bertrand did not flee. He dissolved into the labyrinths of tunnels, immersed himself in traditions, and found anonymity in the faceless mass of the Guild of Stonemasons, which had spread its invisible threads to every cathedral across the European continent. Some skeptics tend to argue that these traditions intertwine many disparate storylines, secret mystical fraternities, disgraced political figures, and little-known apocryphal texts compiled into an extensive tapestry of conspiracy. Perhaps so. However, a legitimate question arises. Why is the identical emblem of a serpent entwining a chalice found in majestic cathedrals 3 centuries after the events described, on different continents of the planet, and always in places where the Templars once worked stone? And why does the name Bertrand reappear in old Parisian archives many centuries later, mentioned not as a simple stonemason, but as a keeper of sacred relics? It is exceedingly easy to get lost in these intricate webs of assumptions and hypothetical scenarios. However, on this day, in the deep silence broken only by the beat of one's own heart, one is invited to walk these paths with a special reverence. One can imagine Bertrand's lamp still emitting light in the depths of that ancient abbey, not as an artifact of bygone eras, but as a burning torch, carefully passed from generation to generation of those who stubbornly refuse to forget. The bells fade, the misty clouds thicken, and in the ensuing silence, the ancient bloodline continues its unseen existence. The traveler followed the ancient map, engaging not only visual perception, but also sensing it with breath, with fingertips. The parchment itself seemed animated, as if each fold and minute stroke of ink emitted a pulse, pointing not to a specific location, but to a particular moment. This was no ordinary trail, delineated by borders and signposts, but a series of symbols, serpents, stars, chalices, skillfully woven into the very fabric of lost European lands. Each such symbol represented an invisible door, and on this day, they stood before one such door. Ahead lay a monastery, skillfully carved directly into a basalt cliff. Its presence was so inconspicuous that it seemed to dissolve into the surrounding landscape, remaining almost invisible. Locals called it the Empty Abbey, a place where the intertwining of light and shadow created mysterious stories on ancient stone. He passed through majestic arched gates, on whose keystone a Templar cross was intricately carved, curiously intertwined with the image of a serpent, an emblem whose true meaning still causes heated debate among scholarly minds. Was it merely a decorative motif created by medieval craftsmen? Or did it represent a veiled emblem of a doctrine uniting Christian and ancient pre-Christian wisdom? The echo of this dispute reaches from academic ivory towers, and yet here it was, immutably carved in stone, remaining unshaken in the face of any academic discussions. The ancient abbey exuded cold, damp air. Its centuries-old walls seemed to breathe out the secrets they had preserved since the last caravan of Templar knights passed through these lands. And in this echo of the past, a dry laugh, like the rustle of old paper, escaped his chest. The path he followed was not just ancient, it was alive, and it seemed to mock those who naively believe that history can be forever buried under a layer of oblivion. He steps into an ancient scriptorium. A profound silence reigned within, broken only by the faint, ghostly scratching of quills. Long since stilled, their unseen rhythm seemed frozen in the air, like a phantom memory. Massive shelves seemed to sag under the colossal weight of countless parchment manuscripts. Here were herbals, cosmological treatises, and those unusual hybrid texts, that academic circles readily categorize as pseudepigrapha when their content falls outside the bounds of accepted footnotes and concepts. And now before him stood a stone wall panel, noticeably smoother than those surrounding it, completely devoid of dust, as if it anticipated his arrival. He pressed with effort a bronze token, depicting a serpent entwining a chalice, into a specially designated indentation. The wall emitted a slow, drawn-out groan, accompanied by an unwelcome creak, and a hidden passage exhaled a stream of cold air onto his skin. The scent was familiar, the aroma of old paper, beeswax, and something metallic. Perhaps it was a kind of blood memory. The interior of the chamber was extremely modest. There were no glittering gilded altars, no jewel-encrusted reliquaries, only an unadorned wooden chest. Its lock was an image of a serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol known as the Ouroboros. Some historians tend to argue that the Knights Templar borrowed this symbol from ancient Gnostic sects. Others categorically reject it, considering it merely a meaningless pagan survival. However, in this place it was neither. It served simultaneously as a key, a formidable warning, and a cherished promise. When the chest was opened, there was no trumpet fanfare, no blinded divine light, only a bundle of ancient scrolls, neatly tied with a red silk cord and sealed with crimson wax. The seal bore an 8-pointed star, an emblem that seemed to refuse to be tamed by any single faith or faction. Christians, Sufis, Kabbalists, each had tried to appropriate it, and yet it rested here, quietly and indifferently, as if asking him, who was he to claim its definition? The scrolls unfurled slowly, as if reluctantly, revealing an image before him that was a map, but not in the conventional sense of the word. It was a constellation, but projected onto the Earth's surface. Here were indicated lines of pilgrimage, invisible veins of ley lines, nodes where sacred geometry seemed to touch the earth. He carefully traced this complex pattern: Rennes-le-Château, Orval Abbey, the Church of Mary Magdalene in Vézelay, a triangulation of stories that were too incredible for academic textbooks, yet too persistent to remain mere legends. A faint smile played on his lips. Some might call it a fruitless pursuit of a ghost, but he knew something more. Geese, as is known, fly in formation, and even in their seeming chaos, a surprising precision is hidden. The moment he rolled up the scroll, a small splinter of wood crunched under his boot. He looked down. There lay a small bronze serpent, once part of the chest's ornamentation. Now it was free. It seemed to smirk at him, perhaps a subtle joke of fate or a reminder. In the Templar world, even damaged objects carried symbolic meaning, waiting to be read. He left the chamber. The light outside the chamber had changed. Shadows had grown longer and taken on deeper hues. Outside, the abbey continued to watch silently, indifferent yet omniscient. Somewhere far beyond these rugged cliffs, other seekers, perhaps, were following different threads of the same intricate web. He wondered if they, too, were laughing at the learned scholars who still fiercely debated whether the Templars consciously guarded their secrets or merely stumbled upon them by chance. The serpent-imprinted token felt heavier in his palm, not so much from physical weight as from historical significance. Travelers descend into the catacombs located beneath the quiet, seemingly dormant village of Rennes-le-Château. The air in this underground realm feels not merely cool, it breathes with profound antiquity. It clings to the skin, wafts at the neck, bringing with it a complex aroma of damp limestone, weathered candle wax, and a faint metallic note. Each echoing step creates unusual rhythms, as if history itself, embodied in stone, stirs, listening to uninvited guests. Stone steps spiral downwards, resembling an auger methodically penetrating the very heart of the earth. Virtually every inch of the walls is covered with intricate carvings. Among them are images of saints, whose faces have been softened and smoothed by centuries of dampness, as well as mysterious symbols that do not fit into the accepted ecclesiastical canon. The visitor runs their fingers along a shallow groove, carefully tracing the outline of an 8-pointed star intricately intertwined with the image of a serpent. This is undoubtedly sacred geometry, yet not the kind that would receive the blessing and approval of Rome. Overhead, the vaulted ceiling stretches like the enormous ribcage of some slumbering beast, its curved stone bones carefully sheltering this hidden sanctuary. In niches meticulously carved into the walls, crumbling effigies rest. Here one can see knights with chipped sword blades, saints whose halos have faded to barely discernible outlines. However, the observant guest notices something else. Among the traditional Christian images are embedded much more unusual and enigmatic figures. A woman shrouded in ivy, a man holding a chalice instead of the customary sword, and a child with a star, as if burned into their chest. All these images represent stories banished from official scriptures, but miraculously preserved here, embodied in stone. Some researchers argue that these catacombs once served as Roman structures, subsequently repurposed by early Merovingians. Other scholars insist on their even more ancient origin, believing they predate even pagan times, having initially been druidic chambers that were repeatedly rebuilt and reused, layer by layer, like an ancient palimpsest of forgotten beliefs. However, local traditions, those whispered after copious wine and in the twilight of night, tell a completely different story. They speak of Templar knights, fleeing persecution, the fires of the Inquisition, and papal wrath, who did not merely hide untold treasures of gold and silver here. They concealed something significantly more valuable and dangerous, a bloodline, living flesh, carefully hidden under the weight of countless oaths and promises, entombed beneath stone vaults. In one corner, beneath an arch that seems noticeably bowed by the burden of centuries, stands an unusual font. However, it is not a familiar vessel for holy water, not shining marble adorned with cherubs. Before one's gaze appears a massive chalice, carved from black basalt, decorated with an intricate pattern of intertwining vines and serpents, whose tails cleverly intertwine to form the outline of an inverted chalice. The scent of myrrh still lingers in the air, sharp and bitter, creating the impression that some ancient ritual has just ended, or perhaps never truly ceased. Images almost palpably emerge, hooded figures circling this mysterious font, whispering words in a language that distorts classical Latin, transforming it into something significantly older and deeper. Clearly, this is not a place for baptism. Rather, it is a sanctuary for anointing, protection, and concealment. Suddenly, the researcher's gaze catches a faint glint. The stone, slightly ajar, reveals a hidden cavity. Inside, a scroll is found, sealed with wax, and its seal, a red Templar cross pierced by a silver dagger, is absolutely unmistakable. The seal is cracked, but not completely broken, as if someone in the past had already considered opening it, but lacked the courage to see it through. The researcher involuntarily hesitates. Deciphering this scroll now would mean awakening an ancient echo not meant for daylight. But isn't that why they came here? Is not curiosity the oldest of sins, the first legacy passed down to humanity from Eve? Some academic scholars, in the safety of their university offices and at their pulpits, adamantly assert that all Templar legends associated with Rennes-le-Château are nothing more than fiction, born from the eccentricity of a 19th-century local priest, Béranger Saunière. They insist that his supposedly mysterious discovery of parchments was merely a clever ploy, an ingenious pretext for illegal enrichment. However, here, deep within the catacombs, by the flickering light of a torch that picks out ancient, time-worn carvings from the darkness, such a theory is perceived as a genuine insult. Stones of such incredible antiquity are incapable of lying. They simply do not need to. One should recall the chapel mentioned in the third part of the narrative. Those very inscriptions that researchers puzzled over, seeming more like convoluted riddles than pious psalms, were not merely decorative elements. They served as warnings, a kind of pointer to something hidden, lying deep beneath them. And this font, this massive basalt chalice, is not merely an ancient relic. It is a vessel specifically designed to hold blood, sacred, defiant blood, blood that stubbornly refused to be erased from the face of history. The air in the catacombs stirs almost imperceptibly, a faint, indistinct sound, as if a small stone shifts. It is not the visitor's breath. They pause, straining to listen, feeling the oppressive weight emanating from the ancient walls. Here, the walls do not merely serve as receptacles for the deceased. They listen, they protect, or perhaps they are waiting for something. Ancient legends whisper of an infant who was secretly anointed here, not with water, but with the very sanctity of an ancient bloodline. A child whose very existence would be an unthinkable heresy, directed against the most carefully guarded truths of the Vatican. Whether this ancient bloodline of that infant continues to pulse in the veins of unsuspecting people today is a question no one dares utter aloud. However, the researcher involuntarily wonders how many veils of history will have to be torn before the true answer reveals itself in its full entirety. The torch in his hand suddenly flickers, as if caught by an unexpected gust of wind. The wavering flame picks out something from the darkness that had previously escaped attention, a mosaic, half hidden beneath layers of debris. Carefully clearing away the dust and small debris, the researcher discovers a distinct figure, a knight gently embracing a swaddled infant, nestled in the shadow of an overhanging cross. However, it is evident that this is not an image of Christ. The infant's head lacks a halo. Instead, there is only a faint, barely discernible outline of a crown. This is not a depiction of salvation, as one might expect. It is, rather, a deeply symbolic representation of concealment. Some historians claim that the Knights Templar once guarded and protected sacred relics from Solomon's temple. Other researchers insist that the order protected the Grail, understood not as an ordinary chalice, but as the Saint Grail, sacred royal blood. A bloodline passed down through the flesh, not through material artifacts. What if both these assertions are true? What if the true treasure was not gold or a precious vessel, but a child born with a name capable of overthrowing kings and even popes? The researcher pauses, thoughtfully examining the mosaic, the scroll, and the enigmatic font. Somewhere above, in the village church, a bell rings, its muffled, distant chime echoing throughout the underground world. There, on the surface, life goes on. Market stalls bustle, confessions are whispered, rosaries are counted in a familiar, established rhythm. But here, deep underground, another unspoken confession lingers. One that the church tried to bury under centuries of prayers and dogmas, but which the ancient stone and the serpent stubbornly refused to forget. The quiet whisper of ancient stones. A step, this time unmistakable, echoed through the somber corridors. The traveler realized they were no longer alone in this dark labyrinth. The catacombs, it seemed, never welcomed solitary wanderers. Perhaps it was a guardian, protecting ancient secrets for centuries. Perhaps another seeker, whose fate intertwined with that of the current wanderer. Or perhaps in such sacred places, the line between guardian and seeker blurs, becoming thinner than the human mind would like to admit. Now this sensation pierced them through. A low hum emanating from the very earth vibrated beneath their feet. It was a pulse, bearing no relation to the planet's core, but entirely connected to what had been locked away and hidden for too long. The Templars may have long vanished from the pages of official history textbooks, but in these ancient stones, in this breathless chamber, their legacy lived on. And as fingers grazed the cracked wax seal, the traveler suddenly realized, some legacies are not merely unearthed, they awaken. By the time the monk returned, carrying parchment, quill, and a half-spilled inkwell, the old knight's hands trembled too much to write on his own. His fingers, gnarled like fragile branches, were numb from years and countless sword-scarred battles. Yet despite physical frailty, his voice remained remarkably firm. It was not the booming command of a Templar captain, but rather the whisper of a man who had dedicated his life to protecting a truth more dangerous than any steel blade. Brother Mathieu sat beside him, carefully dipping the quill into the ink, awaiting each word with the reverence of a student before a sacred text. "Write," the knight exhaled, struggling for breath. "Write that all kings fear what they do not possess. The Merovingians claimed divine blood. But what power does this divine blood hold if it cannot be bought, bent, or forever buried?" Brother Mathieu's brow furrowed slightly in confusion. "You mean the Grail bloodline?" The knight slowly nodded, confirming the inference. They did not merely guard it. They were it. The Grail was not a chalice, but a womb, a vessel of flesh, a woman. Her descendants were persecuted not for what they believed, but for what flowed in their veins, for the blood that could one day legitimize a rival throne or challenge the existing church. The wind outside the monastery walls moaned, buffeting the ancient stone, as if lamenting the unbearable burden of history. The fire in the hearth had diminished to a single red eye, flickering in the gloom. Brother Mathieu wrote as fast as he could, pausing only when the knight's voice faltered or his thoughts drifted to old faces, people long gone, fallen in nameless battles, their names erased by time. "The church feared corruption, yes," the knight continued, his voice growing fainter. "But most of all, it feared exposure. That beneath the gilded mitres and holy relics, the truth had long seeped into the soil, beyond their reach, beyond their absolute control. That the child of Mary Magdalene still walks this earth." He closed his eyes for a moment, his chest slowly rising, then falling again, like a tide reaching its final point. "When we sailed from the Holy Land, we brought more than just relics. We brought parchments, seals, bones, yes, but also something far more sacred. The memory of a bloodline that was not myth, not poetry, but flesh and blood, etched in names. Brother Mathieu's hand paused over the page, the quill hovering. You have names. I, the knight whispered, have names and a map, hidden in plain sight right beneath our feet. Not drawn with lines, but carved in geometry. The true map is the church itself, not its walls, not its layout, not its floor stones, but its axes, the ancient rites encoded in its architecture. Mathieu blinked, his face expressing complete bewilderment. You see, Rennes-le-Château was built not only to honor God, but to guard a gate. Beneath it lies a Roman temple, and beneath that, something even older, a chamber sealed with 8 iron bolts, one for each knight entrusted with this secret. The wind howled louder, and somewhere outside, a bell swayed on its rope, emitting a soft chime, though no one pulled it. They will come, he said. Not peasants, but others, those who wait patiently in silence. The descendants of the original 8. When they sense the seal weakening, when one of us dies, they gather again. He suddenly gripped the monk's hand, his eyes burning with unexpected power. They must not fall into the hands of kings, bishops, or Rome. The child must be hidden, protected, taught to remember without remembering. Taught symbols, not sermons, stories, not dogmas. It is the only way. The child, Mathieu asked. The line is still unbroken. The knight leaned closer, his breath ragged against the monk's cheek. Yes, and it is closer than you can imagine. Look for the families who never sought prominence, the midwives who disappear, the stonemasons who carve more than they are paid for, the women who speak Latin though they have never left their villages, the boys who dream of lions and stars, though no one has ever told them these stories. He leaned back again. The sudden surge of strength faded, replaced by an overwhelming weariness, like a receding tide. Brother Mathieu looked at the parchment, now densely covered with ink and mysterious warnings. He wanted to ask more, but the knight closed his eyes, his lips moving silently in prayer. Moments passed. The candle flame sank low. Then, almost from beneath the chapel itself, the knight whispered again, "It is the ossuary of the forgotten. Move the 4th skull from the left. Behind it is a lock. Use the token from my pouch. It will open the grate." Mathieu's quill scratched faster, ink smearing with haste. Inside, you will find a bronze star. Not the relic itself, but a cipher. Place it on any of the ancient Templar maps, and the map will open. The Grail was never lost. It was hidden in the legacy. The fire crackled in the hearth. The knight smiled faintly, his eyes now glazed. "And one last thing, brother." Mathieu leaned closer to hear. "They will try to distort this," he said, his voice barely audible. "The Vatican, the kings, even the Masons. But remember, truth does not need a cathedral to stand. It needs only memory and a whisper, passed at the right moment. You are the whisper now." With those words, his head slumped to one side, as if under an unbearable burden, and the candle flame, as if echoing his last breath, extinguished, plunging the space into utter darkness. A deep, all-encompassing silence descended, broken only by Brother Mathieu's ragged, quickened breathing, which seemed deafening in this sudden stillness. With utmost care, he lowered the knight's eyelids, forever closing his gaze to the world. And then, as if performing an ancient ritual of farewell, he drew the cloak over his face. In that moment, as grief hung in the air, the bell chimed again, though no one was in the belfry, and far beneath the chapel, beyond layers of ancient bones and forgotten stone, in the impenetrable darkness, a faint, almost imperceptible metallic click was heard, eerily similar to the turn of a key that had awaited its hour for centuries. The spring dawn, contrary to custom, arrived not to the melodic singing of waking birds, but to the accompaniment of an extraordinary silence, the kind of silence that hangs in the air like a breath held too long, emanating not from fear, but from deep reverence. Hidden behind the crumbling apse of a ruined monastery, amidst a chaotic tangle of ivy and rusty gates that groaned like death rattles with the slightest movement, lay a long-forgotten garden. Some traditions claimed it once belonged to the abbess of Montségur, a Cathar woman of exceptional learning, who knew the ancient names of stars and the age-old names of plants. Others asserted that its soil was brought from Jerusalem by weary Templars, who returned not only with valuable relics, but with intimate secrets. Father Matarin appeared as the first morning mists, like finest silk, veiled the damp grass. His journey had begun at midnight, and he walked, guided by a map drawn on sheepskin. The inscriptions on it were not in Latin, but in the enigmatic language of the Companions of the Veil, a language composed not of words, but of symbols superimposed on geometric figures and geometry shrouded in mystical silence. The garden itself was a perfect square, 24 by 24 paces, its corners marked by carved stones with faded symbols, a chalice, a sword, a radiant sunburst, and an 8-pointed star. In the very center of this geometrically precise space bloomed a single rose bush. Its roses were utterly extraordinary. Their petals were a deep, almost black shade of dark red, but it was a red not of passion, but of ancient blood, dried and consecrated. They bloomed only once a year, on the feast day of Mary Magdalene, and only for those who bore a special mark. Matarin approached the bush, first removing his glove. The scar on his palm, though faded with time, still showed clearly in the right light, a tiny mark in the shape of a double cross enclosed within a circle. It had been burned onto him in childhood during a ritual he barely remembered, vaguely recalling stone water, an iron chalice, and a vow spoken in 3 languages, as his hand hovered over the rose, a wind rose, not of the earth, but ancient, whispering through the yew trees lining the garden's perimeter. The petals trembled, and from their folds, a glint of gold appeared. It was a thin tube containing a scroll, no longer than a finger, sealed at both ends with red wax and bearing the mark of a lion, the crest of the house of Debassier. He hesitated. The house of Debassier had been ruthlessly destroyed during the Albigensian Crusade. Its lands were confiscated, and its children scattered or killed. Yet their blood had not vanished without a trace. It had merely gone underground, preserved and passed down through women who, bearing no title, carried the truth in their veins. Matarin broke the wax seal. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of old parchment, no wider than a ribbon. On it was inscribed a cipher executed in sacred geometry, intertwining circles and mirrored lines that, to the untrained eye, looked no more than childish scribbles. But to Matarin, trained from the age of 12 in the sacred arts of Templar cryptography, this message resonated like a psalm. It indicated a location, but not by names, but by ratios. It was the divine proportion phi, encoded in the distance between ancient chapels, sanctuaries, and standing stones scattered across southern Gaul. A map visible only from above, as seen by a hawk or recorded by an angel. He sat in silence, his breathing shallow, as the implications of the realization settled within him like iron nails. The bloodline had not vanished. It had merely dispersed, hidden in plain sight among tombs, hearths, daughters of forgotten names. And now, it was calling for a gathering. He looked at the rose again. A single petal fell to the ground, its edges curled like parchment brought too close to a flame. A sign. The time was drawing near. At that very moment, far to the south, in a quiet monastery nestled among olive groves and silent hills, a young woman named Isora stood before a mirror. She was 17, with hair the color of old oak and eyes the color of wine, dark as ink. Her hands were calloused from hard work, grinding herbs, carrying buckets, tending the sick. And yet, when she placed them over her heart, she felt something stir beneath her skin, as if an ancient current flowed through her blood. Behind her, the abbess entered. "You dreamed again," the old woman said, not as a question. Isora nodded. "Of the lion and the flame." It spoke. The abbess's eyes narrowed. "You are ready," she whispered. With slow, careful hands, the abbess opened a drawer that no one else had ever seen. From it, she took out a pendant, a circle enclosing an 8-pointed star, carved from ivory, darkened by centuries. "It is time for you to know who you are." Maturin would meet Isora in 6 months. By then, 3 crypts would be opened, 2 bloodlines revealed, and 1 secret would dangerously approach the surface. But for now, the garden remained silent. The rose, having delivered its message, would close again, its petals curling into mystery, awaiting the next generation or the next danger. And far beneath the garden, under layers of roots and forgotten stone, lay a chamber, sealed with lime and iron. Inside it rested 3 things: a stone chalice, said to have been carved by Joseph of Arimathea, a book bound in human skin, its words written only in reflection, and a sword with no blade, only a name. Veritas. They had waited long, but soon the blood would rise. The candle in the lantern had long since burned down, its wick vainly resisting the stifling atmosphere of the crypt. Maturin's breath plumed faintly as he knelt before the ancient shrine, his fingers tightly gripping the hilt of the sacred blade known as Veritas. The stone beneath him felt cool and damp, with barely discernible inscriptions, eroded by centuries of reverent prayers and profound silence. Here, beneath the monastery's foundations, lay the absolute truth he had carried across Europe, not in ancient parchments or mystical signs, but in the very essence of blood. Behind him, Isora stood motionless, clutching the ivory pendant to her chest. Her eyes had grown accustomed to the sparse amber glow that now revealed the true dimensions of the chamber. It was not a tomb, as she had previously believed, but a memory frozen in stone. The walls were adorned with frescoes, seemingly alive, that appeared to dance, but whose colors had been softened and muted by the passage of time. The images depicted knights in crimson robes, riding towards a rising sun, a crowned infant held by an elder enveloped in starlight, and a chalice carefully hidden among the roots of an ancient olive tree. Maturin's voice was cracked when he finally spoke the words. This painting was created by the monk Almeric, known as the Silent. He was the last of the Templar masters permitted to record the true events. This He gestured towards a section of the wall where the chalice and infant were depicted, is not merely an ancient tradition. It is irrefutable evidence. Pithorm. Isora approached, treading carefully so as not to disturb the thin layer of dust that lay on the floor, forming intricate patterns. Her gaze lingered on the infant's face. Golden curls framed a serene, innocent, and truly divine countenance. "This child," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "Is it?" "Yes," Matarin confirmed. "It is the bloodline originating from Christ and Magdalene, protected for centuries by those the world branded heretics, and relentlessly persecuted by those who feared this truth could shake the foundations of their world." Isora felt the weight of the pendant around her neck seemingly increase. Her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as they grazed its 8-pointed facets. "And you believe I am of this lineage?" Matarin looked at her with an expression that was impossible to decipher. "My faith has transformed into knowledge. I know." He slowly rose to his feet, the blade softly scraping in its scabbard, and walked towards an ancient stone cabinet skillfully built into the wall. Its facade was adorned with carved signs of a lion and a cross. With effort, he pressed the hilt of the Veritas sword into the central niche, and the blade gently entered the stone with a dull click. Ancient mechanisms groaned, and the cabinet doors creaked open. Inside rested a codex whose pages were sealed with red wax in 7 places. Beside it was a small velvet pouch and a silver mirror the size of a palm. The mirror's edges were inscribed with Latin script. 7 seals, Matarin murmured, as if to himself. Each symbolizes a covenant that was treacherously broken by the Church. Only the blood of the true lineage can break these seals, bypassing the destructive power of fire. Isora reached out, but her movement was hesitant. "But I've never studied Latin." "You don't need to," he said gently. "Your hands will retain the memory of what your mind may have lost. In the blood is knowledge that the mind may not remember." With the utmost care, she lifted the ancient codex. The moment her fingers touched the cover, a wave, like a pulsation, coursed through her body. It was not pain, but rather an internal heat, as if she were bathed in sunlight streaming through stained glass. A gasp escaped her chest, and before anyone present could utter a word, one of the crimson seals burst with a dry, sharp sound. Matarin knelt again, but this time not from reverence, but from profound relief. "So it is the genuine truth. You are its bearer." Isora's voice was filled with awe. "What will happen if I dare to open the others?" He looked at the mirror, which now emitted a soft glow in the flickering light. "You will remember. Not as foreign tales, but as truths you have lived. These will be visions, passed through generations by blood." Her hesitation lasted but a moment. Then, slowly, with hands trembling from tension, she pressed her thumb against the next seal. The seals broke one after another. With each new seal broken, it seemed as if the chamber itself came alive and breathed. The walls exuded the aroma of ancient incense, and the floor resonated with an energy that seemed not to belong to this century. Isora's eyes closed, and a flood of images surged through her mind. A boundless desert under a canopy of stars, a man anointing a newborn's forehead with tears beneath a fig tree, Roman legionaries setting ancient scrolls ablaze, and a veiled woman secretly carrying out one scroll, wrapped in infant swaddling clothes, a mighty fortress atop a hill, crimson crosses on white mantles. Whispers of vows in a language long lost to humanity. A monastery under siege, sisters forming a living circle around a child radiating an inner light. She stumbled, and Maturin caught her. "Breathe," he said softly. "Not all memories can return at once." Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. "It's the genuine truth. All of it. I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes." "You saw Magdalene," Maturin said with deep reverence. "The one who brought light to the world when it turned away from it." For long minutes they stood in silence, not uttering a word. The crypt was enveloped in a silence, thick as a shroud, but now it no longer felt cold. The sword Veritas, resting in its scabbard, now emitted a faint glow from its hilt. The pendant around Isora's neck pulsed with a steady, confident rhythm. Finally, Isora fully opened the ancient codex. Its parchment pages seemed to come alive and blossom at her touch. Golden ink caught and reflected the dim light of the lantern. There were bloodline diagrams, sacred instructions, and prophecies expressed more in symbols than in direct words. "I am the bridge," she murmured, gazing at the luminous text. "I carry both pain and healing." Maturin inclined his head in agreement. "This means your life will no longer belong solely to you. Many will seek to find you, some to protect, but far more to silence you forever." Isora looked up. Her gaze now changed, clearer and wiser, as if she had lived for centuries. "Then I will not hide. I will remember everything." He smiled, not with jubilation, but with a hint of grim hope. "In that case, I have fulfilled my sacred vow." From the depths of his travel cloak, he pulled out the last item, carefully preserved, a letter securely fastened with a wax seal. On the wax, the image of a mighty lion was again clearly visible, alongside which a faint outline of the sun was barely discernible. "Here," he said, handing her the message. "This must be delivered to one who waits patiently in Roseland. He too undoubtedly holds important memories." Isora, listening intently, nodded affirmatively. "And what about you?" she asked. "I will remain here," he replied with unshakable resolve. "The bloodline must continue its journey, move forward. My place is in the past." She opened her mouth to object, but the discerning look in his eyes prevented her from uttering a word, silencing her. He had accepted his fate. This ancient crypt, this sacred chamber of truth, was destined to be both his final resting place and his sanctuary. The last candle, burning down, flickered faintly, presaging imminent change. Isora resolutely stepped towards the passage, clutching the codex tightly in her hand, feeling the warmth of the pendant on her chest. The rose, a symbol of new beginnings, had bloomed, and the world would never be the same again. The path leading to Montségur, like an ancient, mighty creature, wound and twisted through the rugged, rocky ridge of the Pyrenees, resembling a serpent jealously guarding its untold treasures. Gusty winds moaned mournfully through the rock crevices and deep gorges, their eerie howl like the sorrowful laments of souls once perished in the merciless flames at the base of the impregnable fortress. And now, many centuries later, the mountain itself seemed to still bear the charred memory of those tragic events, and the fire-blackened soil stubbornly refused to relinquish the past suffering. Claire's boots barely held on the slippery, moss-covered stones as she ascended the last crumbling steps, leading to the ruins of the ancient castle. Her cloak, damp from the penetrating mist, clung tightly to her shoulders, and her breath came in ragged gasps from the exertion. Behind her, struggling to place his feet, Brother Mathieu grunted under the immense weight of a bronze coffin he carried. It was a narrow, time-worn box, skillfully adorned with an engraved Templar cross and flanked by images of two majestic lions. "No one has set foot here since the Great Purge," he muttered, his voice filled with foreboding. "This place is cursed." Claire suddenly stopped and sharply turned around. "And yet," she said, her gaze unwavering, "we find ourselves here, heading straight into the heart of this curse." Mathieu involuntarily winced, his face showing clear apprehension. "Because you fully believe in an ancient prophecy." "I believe," Claire declared with firmness and cold resolve in her voice, "that Montségur carefully guards within its walls the very truth they feared so much, that they did not hesitate to burn hundreds of innocent souls alive." They passed the remnants of a fragmented arch that once served as the entrance to a mighty gatehouse. Now, ivy and wild roses gently entwined the ancient stones of the walls where vigilant sentinels once stood guard. In the inner courtyard, the bones of the old abbey had long since turned to dust and dissolved into legend, but Claire seemed to almost smell the pungent scent of scorched faith in the air. She instinctively touched the hilt of her dagger, as if to reassure herself that some truths still remained unshakable and tangible. Inside the ruined chapel, Mathieu carefully lowered the heavy bronze box onto the cracked altar. "Here it is," he said with muffled excitement. "You saw its description in the ancient manuscripts." Claire nodded silently, confirming his words. "The Book of Occitania tells of an archive hidden deep beneath this chapel's floor. It's not just scrolls or ink, but blood itself and living memory. The so-called Codex Rex." Mathieu's hands trembled noticeably as he finally opened the box. Inside were a small knife, an elegant ivory vial securely sealed with wax, and a yellowed parchment depicting a map of the chapel floor. A red cross clearly marked a spot at the base of the altar. Claire knelt and began carefully sweeping away the accumulated debris at the foot of the sanctuary. Several loose stones easily shifted, revealing a trap door whose iron ring, though covered in rust, remained intact. She easily opened it with the knife. From the pitch darkness below, a gust of stale, chilling air rushed out. Without a moment's hesitation, she lit a torch and resolutely descended into the unknown depths. The passage she traversed was incredibly narrow, as if barely hewn from solid rock, and wound like a burrow dug by some prehistoric beast. The deeper she delved, the more intense the penetrating cold became, deadly icy like frozen memory turned to stone. Finally, this winding path led her into a small chamber, no larger than a humble monk's cell. The walls of this hidden room were intricately adorned with concentric circles of Templar iconography. Here one could discern crosses, stars, the Chi-Rho symbol, and the image of a dove. At the very center of the chamber stood a pedestal of black stone. On it rested a chalice. It was not golden or encrusted with jewels, as legends often depict. It was a simple clay chalice, covered with a glaze that, at the rim, resembled dried blood. Beside it lay another, smaller box, sealed with red wax and bearing the symbol of an 8-pointed star. Claire reached for the mysterious box, but then suddenly stopped, as if an invisible force held her back. "It must be opened with blood," she whispered, and the words echoed in the cold silence. Mathieu, who now stood directly behind her, stepped forward, his voice filled with alarm. "This is madness." Then it is this madness that has led us here, Claire countered with unyielding determination. She took the ivory vial from the bronze case and carefully dripped a single drop onto the red seal. The wax instantly hissed, as if alive, and the box slowly opened. Inside was not an ancient manuscript, as one might expect, but a stone tablet on which a mysterious ancient code was engraved, Proto-Latin, intricately intertwined with Hebrew and Cathar symbols. Beneath the tablet lay a neatly folded linen cloth, yellowed and brittle from the relentless passage of time. Claire carefully unfolded the ancient fabric. In wine-red ink, a genealogical tree was drawn, but this was no ordinary family tree. The names inscribed on it glowed faintly in the flickering torchlight. Jesus of Nazareth, Mary Magdalene, Sarah. Branching through the ages, each node of this tree was marked not by familiar dates, but by sacred symbols. Mathieu, stunned by what he saw, slowly knelt. "It's true," he whispered. Claire's throat constricted with emotion. "Srex, the living bloodline," she breathed. Stepping back, she slowly surveyed the entire chamber. "This room is not a tomb," she said with deep understanding. "It is a sacred sanctuary for memory." Within the ancient walls, a faint movement was heard. Tiny mechanisms began to click, and gears softly ground into action. The air in the chamber noticeably changed, filling with anticipation. Behind the pedestal, a second, previously hidden door silently opened. Beyond it lay a long corridor, along which stretched stone shelves, tightly packed with sealed vessels. Some were clay, others of darkened glass, and each bore inscriptions in the same enigmatic red ink. Some vessels carried Hebrew names, others Latin, and then among them, she saw one on which her own surname was inscribed. Deco. Claire gasped involuntarily, shaken. "I thought it was just history, a long past, she whispered. "It is," Mathieu said softly, his voice full of deep meaning. "But the past never dies. It waits patiently." He stepped forward resolutely and opened one of the adjacent vessels. Inside, he found a single blood-stained feather and a scroll, fragile with age, yet remarkably intact. Mathieu began to read aloud in Latin, his voice echoing down the corridor. Meanwhile, Claire delved deeper into the study of the mysterious archive. At the very end of the corridor, the stark stonework gave way to a magnificent, unique mosaic. It depicted a mighty lion devouring the sun. Around this central image was a circle of 8 stars, absolutely identical to the symbol on the pendant she wore on her chest. Her hand involuntarily reached for her heart, and at that moment, the pendant began to glow faintly but perceptibly. The chamber instantly reacted to their presence. One of the carefully hidden shelves silently slid aside, revealing a small compartment bathed in a soft, warm, golden light. In its depths rested a reliquary, so unusual that Claire had never encountered anything like it before. It was skillfully carved from stone, complemented by elements of iron and glass, and its shape resembled a living, flickering flame. A faint but palpable pulsation emanated from it, as if something alive beat within its core. Mathieu, stunned by what he saw, instinctively crossed himself. "This is not just blood," Claire whispered, her voice trembling with realization. "This is memory itself, the quintessence of life." They stood in complete silence, enveloped in air that seemed to vibrate with an ancient, almost tangible truth. The outside world also responded to their discovery. Storm clouds once again began to gather over majestic Montségur, as if the mountain itself remembered the great secret that had just been revealed within its depths. Claire's gaze shifted from the enigmatic reliquary to Mathieu. "This is not the end of our journey," she said with deep conviction. "No," he agreed, his eyes full of anticipation. "This is just the beginning of theirs." He gestured expansively towards the numerous vessels, the engraved names, the sleeping blood preserved for centuries. Claire closed her eyes, inhaling the mingled scent of stone, ancient dust, and inevitable destiny. "Let the world forget, but we will remember," was her quiet but firm promise. The air in the hidden archive was permeated with cold and absolute stillness. It seemed thick with the weight of accumulated memories. The walls, richly adorned with ancient Templar iconography, seemed to breathe with their own unseen life, and every chisel mark felt like a whisper from the distant past. In the far corner of the chamber stood a weathered oak lectern, above which hung an oil lamp. Its wick flickered with an amber light that danced, illuminating the treasures of the room, alabaster and bronze vessels, scrolls carefully wrapped in goat skin, and wax-sealed boxes of indeterminate age. Claire stood beside her brother Mathieu, still clutching the flame-shaped vessel they had just discovered. Its warm glow, initially bright, had softened slightly, giving way to a quiet, rhythmic pulse, reminiscent of a heartbeat. "This is not just a reliquary," Mathieu murmured, his voice filled with reverence. "Its unique design mimics a divine flame, something truly sacred." Claire carefully placed the vessel on the lectern. As it touched the surface, a faint, subtle click echoed through the archive. A stone slab in the wall began to slide slowly, revealing a smaller, previously unseen compartment. Inside, wrapped in soft velvet and sealed with a wax impression in the shape of an 8-pointed star, lay a scroll unlike any they had ever seen. Mathieu reached for it, but hesitated for a moment. "This seal, the 8-pointed star, it is the sigil of the original Council of Guardians. This is their last will," he said, overcome with awe. Claire solemnly nodded, confirming his words. "Open it," she commanded. The monk carefully broke the seal, his fingers moving with reverent tenderness. As the scroll slowly unfurled, a fine dust rose into the air, sparkling in the lamplight. The parchment was incredibly ancient, but the ink, still a deep, dark brown, remained remarkably legible. At the very beginning of the scroll, written in Latin, were the words Testamentum Sanguinis, Custodes, Senti, Testament of Blood, Silent Guardians. Mathieu translated aloud as he read, "To those who bear the sign and the burden, know this. The bloodline is sacred not for power, but for preservation. The vessel of divine heritage must never be used for rule, but for remembrance in the shadow of kings and the corruption of Rome. We hid the truth beneath stone and silence." Claire's heart pounded in her chest. "They knew," she whispered, grasping the depth of foresight. "They knew how the church and monarchs would distort it." Further down the scroll, names were listed, descendants by bloodline spanning many centuries, and each name was accompanied by its sigil, a location, and a guardian's mark. Closer to the end, Claire found one name that sent a chill down her spine. Clarissa de Bouchard, guardian of the flame, daughter of the vine, the last heir of Magdalene's vein. Clarissa, her full name, which had been hidden from all records, even from herself. Claire's knees buckled, and she instinctively grabbed the lectern to steady herself. Mathieu supported her, his face pale with shock. "They knew your lineage centuries ago," he said with reverence. Your existence was never accidental. She looked at her name, sealed on parchment long before her own birth. My father, she murmured, her voice full of questions. He must have known. Why else hide all this? Mathieu continued reading. At the rising of the lion, when the flame and the vine meet beneath the tower of the moon, the guardian of the last blood will awaken the sealed sanctuary. There rests the Grail, which is not a cup, but a covenant. Claire's mind reeled with the revelations. The Grail, it was not a cup. Mathieu shook his head. It was never meant to be. The word Grail from Gradalis meant a step, a passage. Not a drinking vessel, but one for transformation, he explained. They looked at the flame-shaped vessel again. What they had initially thought was just a container could actually be a key, the covenant mentioned in the scroll. It was not an object to possess. It was a rite, a moment of transcendence and deep memory. From the corner of the room, a faint tremor shook the dust settled on the ancient surfaces. One of the walls shimmered, and the clear outline of an arched passage appeared on it, as if engraved by light, as if reacting to the scroll. Mathieu gasped. Claire, the scroll is the final seal. She stepped forward. At that very moment, the flame-shaped reliquary began to pulse in rhythm with her own heartbeat, and the sigils on the doorway flashed brighter. Star, cross, chalice, vine, lion. This is the sanctuary, Mathieu breathed, his voice full of wonder. What the Templars protected with their lives. Claire looked at the last lines of the scroll. To awaken the memory of light, the guardian must freely give what was given, blood unblemished, intention uncorrupted. Now she fully understood. The vessel demanded not only her bloodline, it demanded her free consent, her voluntary connection to this ancient lineage, but not for dominion, but to remember and to guard. She turned to Mathieu, and in her voice was a question full of deep meaning. You said it wasn't about power. Then what is it? In response to her words, he merely smiled wearily, uttering, It is about hope, about legacy. It is a reminder that the divine can take human form, and the human can become divine. Claire confidently moved towards the ancient archway. As she approached, the symbols on the stone flared with new intensity, and the stone structure itself moved, but did not recede. It smoothly lifted upwards, like majestic gates. At that moment, a sudden gust of warm, dry air rushed into the archive, bringing with it a complex aroma, myrrh, old parchment, and something sweeter, reminiscent of freshly crushed grapes. The sanctuary that opened beyond the archway was bathed in a golden glow that seemed not artificial but natural, as if preserved by some unknown alchemical force. Inside the sanctuary, frescoes came alive on the vaulted ceiling, creating a dynamic composition. Here, Magdalene was depicted gently embracing a child, next to a man who was not crucified, but shone with an inner, almost divine light. Next was a circle of guardians, clad in white and crimson robes. Another fresco showed an olive tree with bloody roots and fruits blazing with fire. Claire froze on the threshold, her breath caught in her throat. She felt something ancient awakening deep within her being. It was not knowledge in the usual sense, but rather a deep, genetic memory. It seemed to her that she had been here before, or at least her blood held memories of this place. Behind her, Mathieu stood in reverent silence, struck by the grandeur of the moment. With trembling fingers, Claire carefully lifted the reliquary and stepped into the sanctuary. At that moment, a low, deep hum resonated throughout the chamber. It was not a voice, nor a simple vibration, but something in between, something that penetrated to the very core. And at the very moment her foot crossed the threshold, the frescoes on the walls came alive. Not literally, but through movement suggested by the play of light and shadow. The divine and the human intertwined in a single dance across the ceiling, and Claire suddenly realized the Grail had never truly been lost. It continued to live, hidden in the hearts of those who were willing to remember. And now she was ready to remember everything. The wind whispered softly over Montségur's high ridge, carrying the faint scent of sage and ancient stone. Claire stood at the very edge of the old fortress ruins, her boots seemingly rooted to the centuries' blood-soaked earth. The sun had just begun its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Pyrenees, painting the sky in fiery amber hues and bathing the ancient stones in golden light. In her hand was the final piece of their long quest, a goatskin scroll, sealed with red wax, emblazoned with an 8-pointed star and the sigil of the Templar order. Mathieu silently approached her. He said nothing, merely placed a hand gently on her shoulder. No further explanations were needed between them now. Together, they had traversed dark crypts, intricate catacombs, sealed tombs, and forgotten monasteries. They had bled, hidden from pursuers, fled, deciphered ancient messages, and doubted. But now, at last, they stood on the threshold of true revelation. Claire knelt beside the broken stone altar that had once been the heart of the Cathar stronghold. The stone surface was heavily weathered and cracked, but in the light of the setting sun, faint carved patterns seemed to come alive. These were runic spirals, graceful vines, and a central emblem. A chalice nestled within a fleur-de-lis symbolized not merely French royalty, but something far older and deeper. The sigil of a divine lineage, kept in the strictest secrecy. She carefully took out the scroll and broke the seal. The wax cracked with an unusually resonant sound, reminiscent of old bones. Inside, the parchment was fragile but miraculously preserved. This time, the inscription was not in Latin, but in Occitan, its letters smooth and flowing, with glyphs only occasionally interrupting the text, like constellations embedded in ancient scripture. "This is not a confession," Claire murmured, translating the text aloud. "This is a remembrance, a memory recorded to protect the truth, the primogeniture." She looked up. Through the ruins, hidden behind a pile of fallen stones and wild fennel, was the entrance to an ancient cistern. Claire had seen it before, in her dreams, a dark, circular opening, plunging deep into the earth, guarded by a symbol carved at its threshold, a red cross flanked by 2 intertwining serpents. They descended together. The air below was cool, damp, and utterly silent. Underground, the world plunged into deep shadow. Only their torches illuminated the walls, covered with rough ochre frescoes depicting figures resembling Magdalene, carrying infants, crossing seas, standing beneath stars. These women were veiled not by shame, but clothed in dignity, grace, and perceptive intelligence. Further, in the depths of the cistern, they found it. A stone sarcophagus, devoid of any inscriptions, save for an 8-pointed star intricately engraved on its lid. It rested on a special pedestal, surrounded by small altars, each bearing time-worn objects. Among them were a bronze mirror, a white lily carved from bone, a stone chalice darkened by centuries, and a wooden box meticulously sealed with lead. Claire stepped forward, and each beat of her heart echoed in her ears like a bell. She didn't need to ask permission. She placed her hand on the lid, and it felt warm to the touch. She spoke not a prayer, but rather a declaration, equally filled with faith and fury. I am not here to worship the past. I am here to remember the truth. And then, gathering all her strength, she lifted the lid. Inside there was no corpse, no bones, only carefully folded fabric, linen, white as freshly fallen snow. On it lay a single crimson ribbon, frayed and fragile at the edges. It symbolized the blood that was not lost to time, but patiently and quietly passed through the veins of women and men who, perhaps, never knew their true heritage, but lived it in their acts of compassion, resilience, and light. Mathieu, barely breathing, knelt at the altar. "This is not the end," he whispered. "No," Claire replied, her voice barely audible. "This is a return." The ribbon on the sarcophagus trembled, as if touched by an invisible breath. The torchlight flickered. Then something changed. Behind the pedestal, a section of the wall began to glow faintly. A fresco appeared in the stone, long hidden beneath centuries of dust and mineral deposits. As the torchlight fell upon it, the image fully revealed itself. The fresco depicted a woman holding a child, surrounded by stars. On the child's palm was a distinct mark, a chalice, but beneath them stood not men of war, but women in cloaks, their faces serene and full of inner strength. At their feet lay a red cross, broken yet still whole. Claire's knees suddenly weakened, no longer able to support her. She sank onto the cool, rough stone, and burning tears blurred her vision. They never guarded the artifact itself, the material embodiment, she said, realizing. Their true mission was to preserve memory, that intimate truth they feared losing, feared it would be irrevocably erased from human consciousness. For this reason, they prudently encrypted and hid it in complex symbols, in ancient traditions passed down by word of mouth, and in intricate bloodlines, protecting it from oblivion. Mathieu, sensing her shock, gently helped her to her feet. "So what now?" he asked. "We will share this," Claire replied, "but not with the whole world. Not yet. We will reveal this information to those who have already begun to awaken to memories, who feel the call of the past, to those who never lost their inner sense, who did not forget the life-giving taste of light." With a unified surge, they moved upwards again, towards the slowly fading daylight. Over the vast expanse of the earth, the sky was painted in deep shades of violet, heralding the arrival of night. High above them, in the boundless blue, a solitary hawk circled gracefully, like a silent guardian. And at the very moment when the last farewell rays of the setting sun gently touched the ancient ruins of Montségur, Claire experienced a sudden, piercing epiphany. She perceived it not with ordinary sight, but with something far deeper, more intuitive, something rooted in the most ancient layers of her being. Before her inner eye arose the clear outline of the original, long-vanished fortress, as if recreated from golden light, shimmering in space. It was not merely a vision, rather a profound memory of the stone itself, and beyond it, beyond the fortress's contours, stretched a road, a path not marked on any known map, yet undoubtedly ancient, patiently awaiting its travelers. She turned to Mathieu. "Are you ready to follow it?" He smiled, and a spark of determination flashed in his eyes. "I have walked it all my life," he replied. As the first stars timidly twinkled in the boundless canvas of the sky, they, holding hands tightly, stepped onto this uncharted path. Their journey led not to a conclusion, not to the end of the familiar, but to a deeper, fundamental beginning of a new stage. They were heading to a sacred place where blood and light mystically intertwine, symbolizing ancient roots and enlightenment, to a place where truth is not locked in cold vaults or dusty archives, but lives and awaits its hour in the depths of human hearts. To a place where the centuries-old past can finally remember itself, revealing its secrets.